Just a quick one today to talk about what we call divergent thinking. Now, it's not something we've spoken about. I intend to do a video on this fairly soon. But in design, what they like to see is divergent thinking, in other words, coming up with multiple ideas and then combining those ideas down in what we call convergent thinking till you come up with a final idea. Now, in our situation, that means we need to look at lots of different aspects of our design and then narrow it down by combining, by putting it all together to make our final design proposal. And so I thought what I'd do today is a quick video on fonts. There's no sketching involved in this one, but you can sketch these fonts. You don't have to do what I've done, but I'm going to show you a method that I've done to put together one idea for a title. Now, I did a search on the internet for 1960s fonts, and it came up with about 450 of them. So this is the first page. These are the sorts of fonts that were around in the 1960s or were popular in the 1960s. Likewise, I did 1970s because the Vietnam War, of course, crossed from the 60s to the 70s. You can see some of those are actually similar. This is a very iconic 1970s font, Keep On Truckin', and does really well. This is another font that I was quite taken with because it's all about the army and stenciling locations and names and all that sort of thing onto the boxes and the paraphernalia that they took across to war. So I took that and I ran with it. I think in a previous video I mentioned MASH, an old TV program. The font that they use for that is this stencil font. This is another one. I did a search for Vietnam War fonts. I actually came up with this one, which is quite nice. Took things from the 1960s and it actually analyses them and tells you what fonts are used. This is a cassette that I used to have myself. I quite enjoyed it. He's a comedian, but he talks about his time as a medic in the Vietnam War. And you can see there that they've actually used three fonts. They've used this ITC American typewriter, and they've also used stencil. I can't hover over it and point to it, but the name there is what we call stencil font. The fact that it was in that box as well has given me a little bit of inspiration. Now, when I say divergent thinking, you would probably try and do some of the titles and names and things in 3 or 4 different fonts first, and then choose the one you like, or figure out how you can combine them. Now, when we did our mind map, I think I mentioned how you should only use about 2 fonts, 2 or 3. You can see that this particular one that I'm pointing to uses 3 fonts. It uses stencil for his name, uses ITC America for Hey Doc, and you can't really see it, but if we click on it, you can see the Helvetica used pretty much everywhere else. And so there we go. It's using Helvetica for the rest of this cassette label. This is kind of like what you would do for your book cover. So there's the front. There's the spine, and cassettes had a short back cover, but a book would obviously have the same size rectangle here as it is back there. But you can see all of this is Helvetica. That is actually the logo of the Myrrh company, or a Christian recording company. And so Hey Doc in ITC American typewriter, Mike Warnke in stencil. So I took that one step further. I had a look at fonts that relate to the MASH symbol, and MASH is the 407 7th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. That's where the word MASH comes from. I then actually had a look at Vietnam War protest posters and had a look at the types of fonts there, and there were 2 things that struck me. First, hand-drawn fonts. The second was just these block standard Helvetica style fonts. And they use both of those to make very demanding statements. Those Helvetica, those block fonts are kind of like stop war. They are against the war. They're very demanding sort of thing. I want out. The other thing I noticed is this end of draft actually came up here and also here. If I just go back, that end the draft poster uses this font, which I think came in 1970s, 1960s perhaps. Might be on extra pages. Anyway, I did find that font. Now, if you happen to find a font you like, this is what I did next. No, can't find that font. I'm sure it was actually 70s, to be honest. Let me go down. Obviously, you can do a search for the name of the font. They mention the name on that other page. No. Sans shaded. So I could come into the font here and go sans shaded font. There we go. And you can see sans serif shaded. Now obviously that's one you could actually do yourself by hand quite easily, just by doing a bit of a shadow around the the right and bottom sides of each letter. So that's a good one. Now what I did was I took this 4077 font, and you could do the same thing. I actually downloaded it and I set it up in Microsoft Word and did Ryan's song. I then took a screenshot of that and I put it into a program that I like to use for artwork. You might be familiar with Photoshop. Well, this one's called GIMP and it's free. And I expanded song so that it fits a block with Ryan's, and then I added this bar top and bottom. That's kind of taken inspiration from the Mike Warnke, go back to him, where he's got that in a box. But I like the idea of it being a bar across the top and bottom. Now I've done this in my art package. The next step would either be to trace it straight from the screen like this, or to print that out, put it up on a window, use sticky tape it up to a window and use that like a light box to trace that through whenever you want to use Ryan's song as a title. So if you didn't want to finish your artwork here in a digital format, if you want to do it by hand, you can use the digital format to actually produce the artwork in the first place and then use tracing. Now the next video I'm going to do is about icons, but I'm also going to introduce you to something called yellow trace that we use in design whenever we need to trace something really quickly and get it back out. But have a look around and do a page on various fonts from the 1960s and 70s, and you can talk about what they're like and how they fit this particular task.